What is going on, everybody? Happy Monday afternoon. Thanks for checking in at the Trade to Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dale's going solo today. Anthony made his trip down to Jamaica this week, but mechanical issues with the plane. I don't want to get on a plane that's got some mechanical issues, so flight has been delayed until tomorrow. So I'm going solo here today. Lots to talk about, including this David Boies lawsuit. There was an oral argument last week. We were in Vegas, did get a lot of information pertaining to it as we were busy, but we always have the strongest network out here. We want to go to the source. We're going to bring in Josh Schiller right now as we talk about this and basically what the big takeaway is. So with that, let's welcome in partner of Boies Schiller Flexner LLP, Josh Schiller, back to the podcast. Happy Monday. Good to see you.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
How's things? How did you, if you had to put it in so many words last week, was that a positive for the cannabis space? How would you take that?
So I think that the hearing was terrific. We were on a very quick timeline based on the court's recognition of the public importance of this case. They scheduled the hearing in December before the appeal had fully been briefed. And I think that's important because we've been treated by the courts like this is an important case. And so this means that the case will move forward. We did not get the reception from the court that they were interested in reversing the decision from the district court.
Okay.
And so our expectation is that they will likely affirm the decision, which again puts us on a fast track to make our appeal to the Supreme Court, if that happens.
So which is a good thing, obviously, right?
Well, it's a good and a bad thing in the sense that you have no expectations.
Yep.
But at the same time, we've gotten there much quicker than we otherwise thought we might have. And we're excited about the opportunity.
Well, listen, before we get into specifics about that hearing last week, I want to go into real quick for people that are still understanding the space. David Boies, the lawsuit is funded by plaintiffs that include Verano, Canada Provisions, and a number of others that are making a case that regulations at the federal level are hindering their businesses on an intrastate level. So during the oral arguments at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, your firm representing the plaintiffs argued that the 2005 Gonzales versus Raich decision is no longer applicable due to evolving state cannabis laws and public opinion. It was highlighted the financial burdens imposed by federal regulations and the inconsistency between state and federal prohibition. In response to that, the DOJ defended its stance, emphasizing the impact of interstate activities on interstate commerce and the need for consistent federal oversight. So in layman terms, explain to us what I just outlined, what that means, and am I correct on a number of those things I just outlined?
All except for the statement you made that said the federal government has argued for consistent enforcement power.
Okay.
They've actually said that their policy and their inconsistency in enforcement shouldn't undermine the Supreme Court decision protecting their ability to shut down intrastate cannabis operators. And so that all relates to a 2005 decision where the Supreme Court upheld the right of the federal government to shut down the California medical marijuana practice in its 8th or 9th year on the basis that it would be selling weed to the illegal interstate black market.
Correct.
And so what we have said is that you must now look at the policy again. And we've pointed to the cases that have happened since Raich, which was the 2005 case.
It's almost 20 years ago, right?
It's almost 20 years. And there have been a lot of cases. There have been a lot of decisions criticizing Raich on the way it was founded, the day it was decided.
Okay.
If we had to say one way or another, whether it was wrong the day it was decided or right, we don't really have to, right? What we're asking for is for the court to consider in the first instance whether the policy today satisfies the test that was applied then, but more importantly, the test that's been applied ever since then. And so it doesn't look at whether or not something is being put into interstate commerce in a vacuum. It looks at the interference with intrastate commerce.
Right.
That is completely outside of the powers of the federal government. And it looks and sees whether that is necessary and proper to further the purpose of the goals of the government. And so that was largely avoided last week in the conversation, but in the district court decision, which is ultimately what will go up and be considered, in addition to whatever they may write, if they affirm it. They can affirm it without writing anything, basically, or they can
Right.
affirm it and write a few more details. But the decision in the district court back in April, when we last talked on your show, the ultimate outcome of that was that our clients do have standing, which was really important. The government said, we've never put you out of business or put you in jail, so you don't have standing. And
Right.
That's not right.
No.
All these injuries. And so the court recognized that and found it. That's helpful. The court then looked at our arguments and said they're plausible and they should be considered. They're persuasive to me in many respects. But I'm just a district court judge, and the Supreme Court reached a decision on medical marijuana years ago. And so how can I reach a different decision than the district court told us? And so if we have an opportunity to present that on appeal, we're going to, because this is a ripe issue to look at and examine the government's use of power that interferes with intrastate commerce right now.
Why do you think this has become so murky over time between intrastate and interstate commerce right now, and really the understanding and definition of it all?
Well, I think that I don't think it was ever murky. I think that the word is well used because there's a very limited set of decisions of any importance, in part because the Supreme Court is a very limited court of jurisdiction. They get to not only decide what cases they choose, they get to decide the outcome of those cases. And so they basically leave gaps of 10 years between decisions on important issues like the Commerce Clause. Where
10 years. Wow.
Sometimes 20 years. It depends on the issue. That happens in intellectual property all the time.
Yeah.
5, 10, 20 years before an important decision happens. But, constitutional law decisions have changed over the plus 300 years since our Constitution has evolved. And as our, you said something interesting to me, because I was taught from a young age when I started studying the law that the Supreme Court always pays attention to the public. And we're looking at more than 40 states having now legalized medical marijuana. So the federal government is not shutting down medical marijuana. And we're talking about a Supreme Court case that shut down medical marijuana. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just think about it at a high level. If the Supreme Court won a case to shut down medical marijuana throughout the United States, because if they didn't, as they said, it would allow the black market to prosper. Now that they have 40 states that have medical marijuana, and it might be 40. I was arguing with this after the
39,
election.
or is it 40? I thought it was 39, but
the debate between 39 and 41, and I'm probably the last person to answer that question correctly. But does it matter? That's a super majority of our country that has said, we don't care about that decision. We want medical marijuana. Okay? That's what's happened in our country. And if it takes the Supreme Court to recognize that, then it takes the Supreme Court to recognize that. But we're using this lawsuit to put pressure on the government, to put pressure on everybody to recognize that this industry is here to stay and they need help.
Do you think they understand that? Do you think, because if I think about an industry that's probably changed more than any other in the last 20 years, it's probably the cannabis space, right?
I think it's grown out of nothing. I mean, it's turned from a illegal, illicit black market business into a real institutional business that's well regulated within each state. And whether or not the black market exists today, that's not part of the decision that has to be made in our lawsuit, because it's not part of our allegations. But one allegation we've made, which is based on credible evidence, is that the black market's been crushed by these legitimate markets growing up. And one thing I can tell you as a consumer, is that it's a much more safe product now. There are issues that are concerning leaders in various states, like are the vape pens too strong? I've heard that a lot. Now, that's not an issue for a lawyer to tackle, but that seems like a pretty simple issue for a politician to tackle, and a regulator to tackle. But if we're getting to that point, then we're actually getting to the point where we're really creating a safe, robust industry that's going to help produce a lot of significant tax revenues that these states are going to depend upon.
Do you think they're open-minded and willing to listen to those types of arguments that are being made? Because like you said, this is common sense right now for those that follow the space, but for those that don't, they're still very uninformed about where the direction or where the industry is today. Don't you think?
Well, I think that's depends upon, in part, old-fashioned attitudes towards the drug in and of itself. Like
So it
there are,
remains a generational thing. We hear that a lot. But
yep.
anyway, continue your thought.
But more importantly, I think that is being diffused by people who have access to gummies and different kinds of strains of weed, and they're being educated about what the difference is, and being taught that if you just try a little and you might like it, it may be better than an ibuprofen, it may be better than a painkiller.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's better than an opioid. We all know that much. And the federal government itself has made that decision in terms of its rescheduling efforts. So if we can just keep this case going and apply a little bit more pressure, I think it helps everybody.
Yeah, agreed.
Ultimately, when 39 or 41 states or 42 or 38, wherever it is, it's not going backwards, it's going forwards.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. So how much do you think of a role do you think the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment played in your arguments? And for those that don't know, what is the amendment and why is it key in your arguments for those that are still learning?
So the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment was passed by two congressmen in California at the beginning of the real growth after Colorado, when several other states started pushing, including California, for both medical marijuana and adult use. And they wanted the federal government to not shut these people down as they had in 2005 and 2003 under the Bush administration. And it was really important because they defunded, or they put a rule that said none of the budget of the Department of Justice can go to indicting or shutting down lawful intrastate medical marijuana practices. So the very thing that the Supreme Court upheld as a lawful use of federal power, the federal government itself said, we're not going to do that anymore.
Right.
Okay? That's the one truth about our case. And that is an important fact, because if the federal government no longer wants to do that, then how is what they are doing a lawful use of their power anymore? We simply are working to explain that it isn't, because there is no explanation for that.
Yeah. Well, I hear your point. So with that, what do you think was the main objective in last week's oral argument? And what are you looking, I guess, ultimately to achieve out of this based on behalf of your plaintiffs?
Well, we were arguing that the case should be sent back so that we could argue for summary judgment on the new facts. And I think the court was hesitant to agree with us. And it appeared to us that the court was more likely to just affirm the decision on the basis that the Supreme Court decision controlled. And if that's the conclusion they make, then that's a fair conclusion for them to make, but then they don't tackle the issue and they pass it along. That's an outcome we were prepared for. And we will take this case to the Supreme Court at the next step if that happens. On the other hand, if we go back to the district court, we're happy to make our case and establish it through facts instead of pleadings. But the facts aren't going to change. And the pleadings reflect the evolution of the federal government's position, which I think illustrates our point. And so we're excited about the opportunity to have another chance, and we're hopeful to get it. We have no expectations about it.
So the judge does seem, I guess, a little bit skeptical when we were listening. Do you find that correct based on some of the feedback that we were reading online? And like you said earlier, the Supreme Court, if it is actually presented to them, there's pros and cons to that. So what are the pros and what are the cons involved in that?
In the Supreme Court's decision to take it up?
Yeah.
So we presented this case as a very narrow case. And so the pros are easy to justify, right? The benefits to getting rid of federal criminalization for this industry and for the American society in general are well known. Social justice issues, the fact that people won't be put in jail, we'll leave it to the states, and people will. Let me put it this way: no one will ever be put in jail again for having an ounce of weed in their pocket or their car, unless it violates a state law. And I'm not aware of a state law that it would violate. Let me put it that way. Now, it doesn't mean that people can bring ounces and ounces of marijuana around the country and sell them everywhere. That's not the case. We're just trying to stop the criminal power of the federal government to interfere with these intrastate businesses, which must comply with state law. But it will immediately get rid of the tax penalty they face. It will immediately allow them to become normal businesses in the sense that they could seek federal businesses loans for small businesses. They can list themselves on the American stock market instead of the Canadian stock market, like
Of course.
we all know. And they could get credit card and regular insurance and all of the other things that would minimize the danger and problems created by being cash operators. It would be instantaneous and it would be triumphant. On the other hand, there is no justification for the continued stigma and dogma that's created by this idea that the federal government needs to continue to criminalize some weed.
Right.
It just makes no sense.
Yeah.
There's no explanation for it.
No, and I hear you there. So how do you think the judges will, I guess, perceive this information? It's pretty, as I said before, we follow this space, and I got to admit, this industry has not had a big win, and I can't remember the last time it has, but even something small as far as an incremental step would be massive for this industry right now. But when you look at some of the sentiments going on with some of the news regarding Donald Trump recently endorsing, Amendment 3, which took place in Florida, RFK now being appointed as the head of the HHS and what he thinks is more research, does that have any influence, or is this the court of law? It's completely separate and will have no impact or influence on what is being presented as far as, public appeals, another one? Like, where does that sit?
I'm glad you said it just that way, because the way that our government is structured is that the courts are supposed to be independent of the administration and the executive branch, and they should be. But what you're talking about is the executive branch's recognition of a supermajority of people in this country and states in this country recognizing that people want access to cannabis. They want free access to it and easy access. So they want the states to regulate it and make it safe. And that's what's happening. And ultimately, that should matter to the next court that has an opportunity to weigh in on this case, whether it's this court or a court beyond them, like the Supreme Court. That will all matter significantly.
Yeah. 70%, I think it is the stat that Americans want cannabis to be federally legalized, not just from a medical standpoint, but recreationally as well. So when you talk about public opinion, those are some staggering numbers, right?
A supermajority usually is 63%. And so that's 70%. That's how many issues can you get 70 to 30 on in this country these days? Not very many.
Would have been nice on election night in Florida, but that threshold didn't meet. But I'm sure there's a few people obviously thinking that. So, okay.
The people who vote in Florida are sort of skewed, both in terms of age and other things. And that's a state that will continue to evolve, I think. And we'll
100%.
See that vote again.
Don't get me started on that, with Governor DeSantis basically speaking the next day saying the Floridians have spoken. Meanwhile, 58% voted in favor for it and 42% said no. So, yeah, the people did speak, but obviously there was a lot of people not listening. But how would you best describe and how you addressed, I guess, the judge's concerns about the potential interstate impact of intrastate cannabis activities? Like, what stood out to you the most pertaining to that?
Well, the court had a hard time looking at the cases following Raich and understanding how the necessary and proper clause has been treated by the Supreme Court cases, including specifically in the Obama tax case, which is what everybody knows. But it can't be that we simply have a product that's being sold in a state and therefore the federal government has a right to interfere with that product's business. There's a test beyond that, and so I think that this court will tackle it. Certainly, the Supreme Court has commented on it routinely since in the last 20 years, and I think that our belief is that this is one of those issues that should be left to the states.
Yeah,
and it's a pretty easy issue. We've tried to distinguish it from trying to attack the CSA, the act that governs all drugs, because we don't need to. And I think that the more I travel around this country and talk about this case, I don't think anybody really understands what's going on to these businesses. And I think if anyone really did, they'd be really upset about the federal government's interference, because the federal government doesn't really show an interest in interfering with it. They're just interfering with it. And that's the most basic way to understand it.
Well, I was with a constituent in Washington back in, September, and she had raised $2 million to start a dispensary in New Jersey. We had her on the podcast a couple months ago, and all of the red tape that she had to go through had yet to open up, couldn't get her license. and was about to actually close the doors without even opening them and walking away from it all. Imagine raising that kind of money and not be able to actually start your own business. Fortunately for her, she went to Washington. It's all about generating conversation and making sure that you're in front of the policymakers. And eventually she got her license within a week or two. But I think that's probably the issue, which a lot of people are actually interested in this case, is because we need conversation to educate people on what this current industry is. Because as I said earlier, it's evolved drastically in the last 20 years. And this is why it's just, for people that follow it, some of these laws that are put in place are very, very dated. Is that compelling for you when presenting a lot of information to these judges, knowing how dated some of the information, some of the rulings that have taken place, which is, to your point,
Well,
10, 20
you're
years ago?
preaching to the choir here, because we haven't even had a chance to present information beyond our complaint. In our complaint, we put a lot of time into it, a lot of thought into it, and it articulates a position of the federal government that has changed. And so all we asked was an opportunity to present that, and we got denied that, and hopefully we'll have the chance again. I couldn't agree with you more. The federal government's position in response to our case has been to say as little as possible.
Yeah.
And I get that, it's strategic, but we represent what I view as the will of the American people in this case. And if we have to bring another case for another purpose down the road, we will. We're going to try to put all the pressure we can. And I think it's important to understand that the people behind this case are really trying to raise all boats at the same time, and make a good concerted effort to do that, and deserve some recognition for their fight. This will help everybody immediately the day it happens, if it happens.
Was there any specific questions from the judge last week that surprised you at all, or indicated their leanings when presenting during the oral arguments?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I was surprised that they didn't ask more questions, more than what the questions they asked were. I wasn't surprised by their questions, but they seemed to have thought that this was a case that was outside of their hands from the questions they asked, which isn't surprising, but disappointing in some respects.
What do you think was the strongest point made during your oral argument?
Well, I thought my partner, David Boies, made a brilliant rebuttal argument and really put the court back on to the issues that have been raised since the decision, as opposed to just focusing on why that decision was valid at the time it was valid. And I think that's probably what our case is all about. And important for everybody to understand.
Yeah. Is there anything further you want to outline? Like, if this indeed gets actually presented to the Supreme Court, like, what would be then your strategy if the case is appealed and presented to them, outside of what you've already outlined?
Well, I think that it's pretty much within the four corners of what we've already argued. In all respects, the thing that may change if we were to be so lucky as to get to the Supreme Court, although of course you've lost if you're there, but we would appreciate anything else that's happening, including rescheduling, moving forward, just to show the court that this is moving forward. The federal government's position is to move this forward, and this is an important time to decide why. To have a new important Supreme Court case, freeing up business in these lawful, well-regulated state industries.
When do you think a ruling will happen, or is that just, you don't want to speculate?
We should have one, in the next few months. It usually takes a few months, but they heard our case really quickly, and so we're hopeful that they'll make the decision quickly and then give us an opportunity to move on if we have to, or go back to the district court and move quickly as possible if that's the outcome as well.
Some of the plaintiffs that you represent, what was their feedback based off of last week from the conversations you've had?
I mean, I think we all prepared them for this decision, so I don't think any of them were surprised. I mean, we've said that, there's always the case where we could run into the district court or the appellate court that says the Supreme Court decision stands and we can't overturn that, and so our hands are tied. So none of them are surprised, and if that's the case, and I think they're all looking for this as a not a quick and easy fix, but a way to continue to put pressure.
So we're looking at probably a couple of months, is what you're thinking, come 2025. Who knows what this industry will look like by then too. We're about to embark on a lot of, we talk about a lot of change, but once this new administration comes in too, people are hopeful that we will see some rapid change, considering that's the status quo over the past 4 years from a Washington standpoint. But ultimately, I guess a kind of a parting question and like leaving this off strong. What do you think ultimately is the most important outcome you're looking for in all this?
Well, we'd like to win our case, whether that's in the First Circuit or ultimately in the Supreme Court. Our case gives the most certainty to the industry. It allows people to challenge for taxes they've overpaid for decades, but within the statute of limitations, which is probably 3 years. But there's a significant amount of money there. But going forward, what it does is create clarity and consistency. And that will help the industry grow, especially when they can get rid of being a cash business and get rid of the tax penalty. You will see great transformation in this business, and the people who have stuck it out will be rewarded.
Yeah, that's for sure. How much have you learned about this space? Like prior to this lawsuit, like were you up to speed on the overall industry? Like what's been your perception of how
I started the cannabis practice at Boies Schiller years ago, ironically, because a friend of mine called me who was a client. He was working for a big California company, and he said, we really need a big corporate law firm and in New York because we're doing a big deal and we're going to get run over because we're just using cannabis lawyers and we need big New York lawyers for this deal. And I said, great. And I called 3 friends at big New York corporate law firms who I'd known. And at that point, I was a lawyer for 10 years. And so I knew some new junior partners at big law firms, big white. And by the 3rd phone call, I'd gotten to the head of the cannabis practice. And each time the head of the cannabis practice at that big law firm told me, oh, wait, your client's in California? And I went, of course. And they said, oh, well, we're only allowed to represent the Canadian companies.
Really?
And I thought, are you kidding me? And they're like, yeah. Well, we're not going to go to jail. And I went, are you kidding me? And so eventually I just went, okay, they need my help. So I started working for some of these companies. We've had successes and we've had, some troubles. And, I took some equity for fees in a few of those cases. It didn't work out so well, but I'm still optimistic.
Why are you optimistic though? Outside of there's a lot of main reasons why it's to be optimistic here, but I always want to look at things from both sides, I guess, of the aisle. But, what's the biggest thing that you think you've learned about this industry that leaves you feeling optimistic heading into 2025?
Well, I think the stigma is gone. The stigma on weed in general is completely gone. And I think that people are learning that weed is an alternative form to all kinds of traditional medicines that they've taken. It's an alternative form to alcohol and other things. And I think that it's much more acceptable in our society. I think that it is something that everybody needs to learn how to use for themselves. It doesn't make you smarter. I can tell you that much. We're not going to do that. But it has its uses, and it's a form of non-addictive relief in my experiences with it. And, science may have shown that yet. There may be a debate about that, but we'll see. But, ultimately, I think it is a healthier product than a lot of the things that we ingest. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to tell you that. But I think that I think the fact that we have 39 states, or what I want to say 41, because the District of Columbia is there too, shows that its public acceptance is now visible. I think it always was there. It was just sort of hidden behind us. And now it's very clear that America believes that this is more of a positive thing than a negative thing. And it just has to be regulated and controlled by the states in a safe way, including an access to that our children have, which is important to me as a parent.
Yeah.
And I think that the states can do a good job of that.
Well, there's stats that show even in the state of Colorado, where accessibility for people of underage, it's actually gone down quite a bit. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there about, dispensaries being close to schools, which there's not. So there's a lot of uneducated and misinformation that's being spread out about the industry right now, because the biggest argument that I think anyone can bring up is data. And that's the most important thing right now, where we just want a seat at the table to have a conversation to basically explain as to currently what's going on. If there are concerns, and there's tons of data to back and support that. Saying all that, is there anything that stands out to you regarding this case that you'll really need to focus on, that a lot of, I guess, people that are following the space will need to pay attention to? Are there any concerns in any matter whatsoever?
No, I mean, I think this is a unique case. Part of the concerns that I think some people have expressed to me, including journalists interested in the cases, are we trying to take down the Controlled Substances Act? Are we trying to do something that's far beyond what this case represents? And I've told them consistently, no. We are focused on the position that's indefensible as to why marijuana is federally illegal, when the federal government itself doesn't want to shut down the medical marijuana industry and wants it to prosper. If the government wants it to prosper, why is it hurting it? That's the question we're asking. And that's what we're focused on. And that's not going to change. And I think that we've made a good case for that. I think if we had gotten past the motion to dismiss, we'd make an even better case for that. But I think that with the next step, we'll bring in maybe some amicus support and create even a bigger record and background as to why America and the public are interested in us winning this case, and why the federal government really doesn't have an interest at all on the other side of the case.
Why have some journalists believe that you're trying to take down the CSA? Have they outlined reasons
Well, it's
why?
just a question that comes up, right? Are you trying to make mushrooms legal and all that other stuff?
Yeah.
But we're simply trying to enjoin the use of the federal government's power under the CSA to prevent these intrastate markets from existing.
Okay. All right. So you talked about timeline as far as a ruling in a couple of months. Next steps. What can we expect next pertaining to the actual lawsuit itself?
Well, so we'll get a decision from the First Circuit in Boston.
Okay.
That could be January, February. Could be a little bit later. And then if it's against us and affirming the decision, which is, what the panel indicated, then we would be filing a petition shortly thereafter. And we may, the Supreme Court schedule starts in September. So if we were to be filing a petition, we could be on the September or the October docket.
Gotcha. Well, listen, I think on behalf of the cannabis community, good luck. Obviously, hopefully you get the right support, and hopefully common sense, prevails with how much this industry has evolved, like you said, since 2005. And I think it's about to, I think we're turning a corner as we're going to see some rapid change. But, there's optimism in the air, especially with the new administration taking place. And I know that's something completely separate with what you're focusing on. But hopefully, like I said, we see a lot of change in this industry pertaining to this lawsuit as well, and get the outcome that you want. But Josh, appreciate the time. Let's keep in touch, okay?
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Take care.
All right. So I'm solo. What'd you guys all think? I'm reading the comment sections below. I'd love to get your feedback on what you guys think. But best of luck, obviously, to him right now. Guap, if you're watching the show, you've got the link. If you want to log on right now, Guap, feel free to log on, and we can talk a little bit. But just reading some of the comments right here below. Their testimony taking place from January until March. Remember in the government, Al Capone, the booze industry, through prohibition too? This is the same type of concept, but with weed. There's a lot of probably similarities. I'd love to see what some of people in the alcohol industry were asking about that space back in the 1930s. That's for sure. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of similarities as to what we go through on a day-to-day basis. I hope everybody likes some of the questions that I asked. If there's anything that I missed, leave some comments below, because I can still reach out to Josh and any of the plaintiffs. We have close connections with them. So if there's any questions that you'd like to learn, leave some comments below. We'd love to get the feedback. Emily, great to hear from you. Good questions. What else have we got? I think that's pretty much it for now. Wednesday, we've got Seth Yakutin back on to talk about more specific things related to the cannabis space. And yeah, we'll get another recap of what we found, Anthony and I, last week in Vegas pertaining to MJ Biz. Had some conversations with a few people from Canaccord last week. We're now into full-on tax law selling season. However, there is some interest. Maybe some funds will start dabbling into the space come January. That's some of the feedback that I received on Friday. So how much that is, I think they're going to walk before they run. But, let's face it, it's all about January right now as we enter in the tax law selling season, which we know a lot about here in the cannabis space for quite some time. Cole Memo, I appreciate the feedback. Great job, Shad. Thank you. Don Murphy. Yes, Chris, we'll try and reach out to him to see if we can have him on at some point this week. Anything else on people's minds? I'm just going through a couple more here. Shad, what random question? What kind of webcam do you use? Well, I use what's called an Sony A6400. I don't know what the lens is, but I've got about $15,000 of lighting around me. So that's why it looks all nice and shiny. But the idea is to create a platform that is equivalent to a mainstream broadcast right here on YouTube that focuses a lot on the cannabis space. But I hope you guys all like what we're building out here. Anthony and I have the feedback that we're getting right now pertaining to the show is phenomenal. We couldn't do it without you. But next year, we're speaking to hopefully a number of key agencies out of Washington. We really want to build out that network and get some more politicians on. That would be amazing. Wouldn't it be ideal to get RFK on? Can you imagine that conversation about his stance on cannabis and psychedelics? That would be amazing to have that conversation because that would go viral. And I don't know if you guys shared any of my videos lately, but man, they're hitting the algorithm. 75,000 views now on a cannabis reform video that I did 2 weeks ago. And the Pam Bondi one, we'll put that actually in the section below, but on the comment section, it's got close to 10,000 views after posting next week. So what I've found through a few executives from YouTube since the election is that they're changing their stance on the cannabis space. So it's no longer being as suppressed. So what this means is that we're getting a bigger reach. And again, we wouldn't have done it without you guys. So appreciate it. Sonic Yogi doing a great job. Thanks, Ben. Great show. Solid production quality. Great. Stacy Lewis writes, Florida close to the waterways to trade with the islands might have something to do with it in regards to tariffs. Irish, congrats. Always looking forward to it. Appreciate it. All right, guys. I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up here today. As usual, make sure to subscribe to our Baked In newsletter. Lots going on as we gear up towards the end of the season. And let us know, I think we're going to probably do another top 10 moments for the year of 2025 or 2024, I should say, before we go into 2025. Did a video on that last year during the holiday season, which did tremendously well. And also, I think we need to do a contest. I don't know what it is yet, but we need to bring on some of you, the viewers, to our live stream last week heading into the Christmas holiday season. What do you guys think? You like that? Would you want to come on to the live stream? Let us know. Leave some comments. Maybe there's some contest strategies that we could do, but if you want to come on, it's something I'm open to and something that I would love to have, knowing how supportive you guys have been. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'll be back here on Wednesday at 4 o'clock with AV. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hey, everybody. Stay connected here at the latest Traded Black podcast. Another great episode under the belt. What'd y'all think? Do you like what we had to say? Please leave any comments below. And as usual, make sure to subscribe to our Baked In newsletter. Check us out on Apple and Spotify. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to smash that like button, leave some comments, as I said before, and subscribe to our channel because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks again, everybody, for watching.